Welcome to the Voice of Reason. This is your host, John Martin, and I'm here to present some interesting topics tonight for my guests, Rob Koenig and Charlie Garabedian, doctor. I always have to call him doctor. Give him proper educational level here. I'm going to start out with the shootings that happened in Florida and how that might impact us here in Shrewsbury. To start with, a lot of people were confused because of the news. That was not an automatic weapon used in Florida. It was semi-automatic, and he fired 10 bullets at a time in a clip. And they said when he had to reload, he was equipped to do that. 17 kids left the room because he had to take time to do that. So could have been a lot worse. And he stopped shooting. He actually exited the school with the school kids, and so that no one know who was the shooter, although they were witnesses, and he was picked up pretty before the end of the day. In any case, how is that going to impact us? Now, years ago, there was a study done by the police department as to how well we're protecting the school children. They've been doing it for decades, having 2 policemen assigned to the school system, 1 for the high school and 1 for everybody else. And I always thought that was a little bit short because it's like 7 buildings, 1 policeman. Now, when they were doing that kind of work years ago, they didn't think there was going to be no automatic weapon of any kind or long rifle in the school. So the policeman having a pistol seemed to be equal and fair. But today, it's not the case anymore. Now, what are the casualties that we have? I know that we had 1 high school boy shot in the high school parking lot with a pistol. He got shot in the leg by a previous graduate a few months earlier, and he came back for grudge match and used a pistol on him. And but if any individual has some gripe against one person, then it's not going to be mass murder. Might just be 1 murder, but in any case, that day it was just assault with a deadly weapon. Anyway, I'd like to guys get some of your opinions as to how you might want to improve the safety of our children. Started with you, Rob.
Well, it's interesting because obviously it was in the news pretty heavily. And for anybody to go into a school like that, former or current student, it's ridiculous. So, maybe they have to go to a badge system where every kid has a little badge. If they don't have that badge on, they're not coming into the school. This gentleman was suspended, or he wasn't continuing with school for one reason or another, and there seemed to be so many warning signs ahead of time that why wasn't the red flag waved, and he really been put into some sort of program that would have protected people. I know that a lot of the mental health things have been cut back. There's a lot of mental hospitals that have been closed down all throughout the country as a humanitarian type of atmosphere. But whether we have to go to metal detectors and security guards, that's going to cost a lot of money. What do you think, Charlie?
Well, I think we have to look at some of the causes of this. When we look at our society in general, we are permeated with violence. And the violence has become so commonplace that we don't feel it anymore. We have become rather, I'd say, hardened to it. Oh yeah, it's there. And if you take a look at the media in general, because it is so easy for us to report violence all around the world, just think of how we can see what is happening in the conflicts all around the world in an instant. We look at the computer. how much, when we talked about YouTube, but all the different kind of violent acts that you can see there. And it's almost like a recreation to look at these violent acts and say, oh, look at what happened here, whatever it be. Also, when you look at the film industry, how they depict violence on these television programs, which I really cannot watch anymore. What is it, NCIS? That's one program I watched like 15 minutes on just to see what it was about. They were depicting violence in a way that I never thought it would be that graphic. And it's shocking, and it's very disturbing for me to watch. So I don't watch it. Now, young people are being bombarded with this from a very, very young age. And they think that's an acceptable way of doing things.
And the video games.
Yeah, there's another dimension that we don't see. And also, when we look at our adult population, I don't believe that we are a kind nation anymore in terms of how people relate to each other. I'll give you one classic example, is you take our people in government in Washington. The way they speak with one another, they put each other down, the verbiage they use, that is totally unacceptable. And these supposedly are educated people. These are people that are leaders, and this is what they are modeling for the rest of the country to follow. And I look at that and I say, this is totally acceptable. I look at the moral fiber of our nation, what we accept as being, it's okay. Small things, well, he didn't mean that, whatever goes on. We give people second chances, third chances, repeated offenses. How many times have I seen, I'm going to pick on drunken driving, because to me that is all in the same class of terrible behavior. How many times we've seen somebody finally kill somebody with a motor vehicle and he had been arrested how many times for drunken driving or whatever it has to be. The second and third chance routine, I think, has really gone far afield. Young people have picked this up and they think that's okay. So they are not sensitive to what they're doing. And I think eventually they come to a point of being very extreme, as in the instance of this one young man, and he decided to go in there and kill. What is there that exists in their head that they would even think of doing anything like that?
So the penalty is not enough to deter these things.
No, absolutely not, because they know they can get away with it, because there's always a second and third chance. And it starts with small things, and it just can escalate and escalate and escalate and escalate. And then you end up with something like this. I think generally across the board, this is what's happening here. One part of our moral conscience does not reflect what I read on the inscription of the Supreme Court in downtown Worcester on Lincoln Square. I'm paraphrasing perhaps if I'm not an exact quote. It claims that liberty is obedience to the law. So really, do we have liberty in this country? No. We don't. We do not generally have obedience to the law, because in too many people in our culture today, conducting yourself and obeying the law is not part of their life. And I think for us, if I was stopped by speeding, I would be ready to crawl into a hole and die. I would feel ashamed of myself. Just the way you operate your vehicle.
Well, one of my popular TV shows was talking about Colorado Springs, which is where the show originates from, and they were saying that about 6 to 8% of the population are the criminal element that creates the problems for the police department. So, we could talk about eliminating 6 to 8% by either isolating them or giving them proper punishment when they do it originally, so that they don't interfere with the other part of the population that's not a problem. The other part of the population becomes victims of their activities. So, will you guys have any objection to having school teachers well armed?
I've got that down as a question. Absolutely not. School teachers, these are academic people. That's not their job to carry guns and to defend children. I think to solve this problem, if we cannot institute a moral fiber where people just don't do these kinds of terrible, terrible acts, then what we're going to have to do, and this is going to cost a lot of money, but this is the other side of the coin when you don't raise people to be respectful. And we're paying for it. We're paying for it because everybody finds an excuse for an 11-year-old child that does something wrong. He didn't mean to do it, and they don't want. I've seen it in schools. They find all kinds of excuses not to punish him, both in the school and also at the home level, as it was when I was going through. The punishment at home was 10 times worse than if I get into any trouble at school. So that's why you just never get into school.
Well, this last shooting, a number of adults got killed.
Yeah.
They were teachers.
Right.
They were in the line of fire. Right. Matter of fact, they said one teacher walked in front of the shooter to save other children from getting hit. Of course, he took enough to die right there. So the question is, should the teachers, if they choose to protect themselves, have like a shoulder weapon so they could get into the fight, so that they don't die?
Right, but if that happens, John, if we have teachers having guns in school, then you can have an incident there. And that's going to create another terrible, terrible, terrible problem. I don't see it. What we have to do is, it's going to cost money, is you're going to have schools under lock and key at all times. You're going to have armed guards either right out inside or outside the door. You're going to have that watch building patrolled by more than just 1 or 2 people. I think you're going to have a force of people that are going to be there at all times watching these students as they come in. You're going to have to also search the students.
The backpacks?
Everything.
Because the backpacks weren't such a prevalent thing years ago.
No, you carry your books on these.
You had your books. So maybe the backpacks need to be clear bags. You can only bring certain things, your books, your lunch,
Right.
your pencils, your papers. What do you think about cameras in the classroom? Because that's really what it's going to come down to also. If you want to peg somebody on an assault, if you want to peg somebody acting up, if you have the cameras in the classroom, I think that may help.
Cameras everywhere.
But it's cameras in the hallways.
We're looking at a very significant expenditure of money.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about money. Now, the police department has so many different tasks that they have to do. One year, we had a policeman shot by the owner of the Kiosk Motors, and he was laid up for a year recovering from a shot that he took. We didn't have a replacement. The budget would not tolerate another person. So when the school year started, the resource person they call in the middle schools went back to the patrol, back to the car. There was nobody securing 7 buildings that year because he was busy. Now, that shows you the priority of the police department. The school children were dead last. The dead last. And I think that no one seemed to pick it up at the time. I certainly did. That why don't we have enough money? Now, there was a study done by one of the selectmen of how we got into this money crunch. It's when they came out with 2.5, they set the budgets based on what the history they've been spending money on, and they couldn't raise it more than 2.5% a year. Now, that'll probably keep up with inflation, but not growth of the population, growth of the school children, more staff on the schools and whatever. We couldn't catch up. There was no way. So every year now they come out and say, what was this year like? They wanted $4 million more. They know they weren't going to get it. So if they got $2.4 million, then we could sort of trim the programs, but still have a major program going on. They never say that they would cut back on required classes to graduate. They don't say that. So there's a lot of programs going on that cost money but are not part of a student's record. And so we have to start thinking about the priorities of the budget, how that relates to ever getting our budget straight. I mean, they tried it once. They raised the property taxes on us, and they split the money up between the schools, and the fire department, and the police department. And our friend good Lutek had studied it and said, we'll be right back here 2 years from now, because the growth in expense was like $4 million a year. So even though they had enough money to get by year 1 and 2, they didn't have enough money to get by 3. And that's what they had. They came back and said, we have to cut somehow. And they've been doing it. And so people don't like the school department because they have things that they can cut out of the budget and you don't even miss it. And that they're saying, so why are you saying you need all this money when you have a program that's not even needed for the basics? They don't think basics. Now just think of this. We've doubled the population of the schools and all the staff since Proposition 2.5 came into existence. No way have we been trying to keep up with the growth. No way. And so they tried that 1 year, and they were surprised they couldn't even break even in year 3. They just couldn't do it. And so they gave up even trying. I think it's a responsibility of the selectmen to realize the type of problem that we have and how we'd ever get out of it. And so I had one person tell me, what's the reason to having better schools? Do we need better schools? Well, when I came to town 20 years ago, they were about 80%. 80% of students were doing well and going on to college and that type of thing. But we haven't got better one iota in 20 years. They came with a new grading system, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever. We've been at 2 since the first time they were evaluated, and we're still at 2. That's about 80% proficiency. It's not going to get any better unless they invent a new system.
Well, I think the system needs to be changed a little bit, and you need to go to some computer educational programs where, yes, you have study halls, and every kid has a computer. So it's not necessarily the best idea, but it does cut back on some of the expenses, and you put them through, specific computer training programs, and then they qualify for the real teachers at the top levels of their classes as they go on to be juniors and seniors. But I really think computer training needs to be implemented a lot more.
I think students have to be, again, it goes back to our problems of behavior. With students in general, I mean, we have discussed on a previous program that one student that you had encountered at the intersection of Route 9 and North Quincy, riding his bicycle 7:30 at night in the dark. And a lot of this kind of ill behavior is present. So if that's how he's acting there, how is he acting in school? And how are the others acting? And that's something that we really don't see, that's not discussed very often. Just what is their discipline problems? And I say there are a lot of discipline problems, not just in Shrewsbury, but across the board. Lack of respect. And we talked about the police, John. I think the police in this country have taken a very, very terrible, terrible rap in terms of the moment there's one instance of some type of police brutality that becomes the biggest news of the day. And I'm not excusing it, don't get me wrong. But if you look upon what they're up against and how they are forced, how these people are pushed, they push them right to the limit in terms of how people taunt them. I mean, when a police officer says something to you, you do it because that's authority. But again, obedience to the law. They have no respect for the law.
But I think if the kids knew that there were cameras in the classes and the cameras in the halls, that's going to cut back on a lot of the issues when it comes to discipline, bullying, which has been a big topic of conversation
exactly right.
lately. bullying in Shrewsbury schools is, it's
It's
there.
everywhere.
It's there, it's everywhere.
But it goes back to the homes. Don't these parents teach their children at a very young age that you don't treat people in a disrespectful way? I don't believe that exists in a lot of homes. I really don't. I hate to say that. Because I will give you, I don't know, I mentioned this before one time, and I don't do it anymore because of what happens in the 7-Eleven. I will not go in there in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I went in there once to get some milk, and there were students there, and I was waiting in line, and 2 or 3 of them, they're fooling around, and one of them, 2 or 3 of them bumped me. They saw that they hit me, and they looked at me and didn't say a word. I said, "Excuse me." I says, "You just bumped into me." I said, "Settle down." I said, "You're standing in line." And they had no regard for an adult or another human being, forget about that. And they were doing it to each other. And finally, the owner saw what happened, and he told them, "Get out of here."
And don't go into Dunkin' Donuts about that time of day
Right,
either.
it's the same thing.
I'll tell you that. There's kids all over the place.
Which is
You can't
fine.
even buy anything in there when
Yeah.
we're there
Yeah.
packed in.
And I have no problem with them being there. They have to be someplace, that's fine. But they have to learn how to behave themselves in a civil way, and they have not learned it. And they haven't learned that is an important part of their being. And they also don't have any respect for themselves, that somebody would talk to them. They'll answer the person back. And I'm quite sure the police, if they speak to somebody, many of them have to take lip from these young people. That's totally unheard of. And the parents will defend it, which is even worse.
And the parents seem to want to pick the kids up at a different place. "Oh, I'll meet you at Dunkin' Donuts to pick you up an hour after school," or "I'll meet you at the library a couple hours later. Let the library do the child care for me for a while."
No, that's...
So they're talking about what age that they would accept someone in without a chaperone. I think it's going to be around 10 or 11.
Yeah.
But they're saying the need to black some of the kids from coming in if they don't have chaperones.
But the whole problem boils down to how all of us in this culture relate to one another, even the people that we know. Do we really respect them? Look, we talk about road rage. Is there any need for road rage? What do they think that they're going to accomplish by having this road
They're
rage?
going to get there a little, maybe 10 seconds faster because they didn't let a car merge in.
Right.
And you could have easily just let the car merge in and just...
Because if you're in traffic and you're late, well, then you're going to be late. There's no way of solving that problem other than leave 2 hours ahead of time. You have to plan, and they don't want to do that. But they get the anger that they have, and they have no shame of displaying that anger publicly. And I think that's a big problem. They don't see that it reflects upon them as human beings. Again, pride in yourself. What is your identity? What is your, let's say, I don't want to say claim to fame, but what type of reputation are you putting out for the public to look at?
Well, let's spend about 5 minutes on this library
A lot of
issue
people
that you
don't
wanna
seem
talk
to
about.
care. Yeah, go ahead, John. We could say something about the library, I think.
Yeah, what is going on with the library?
I enjoy the library. I actually like the new library. It's very interesting. However, there are certain times of the day I don't want to be in there because it is very noisy. It gets overrun right after school for a few hours, and it becomes a daycare center. And they don't limit where the kids can go to an extent because they're pretty much all over the library. If it was more of a limiting area, couple of areas where the kids could go, that may help. But you know, a lot of the kids will get together and get a room, one of those small little meeting
Right.
rooms upstairs. You can get maybe 4 or 5 people in there comfortably. But what seems to happen, the room gets overloaded, and then you can hear right through the walls in those rooms, and it's just kids supposedly working on homework, but it turns out, you know, more of just a texting section. They're texting back and forth between each other a lot of times.
Another instance of where they haven't been taught to behave in the proper way, at the proper place, and the proper time. That's what it really boils down to, doesn't it? Everything goes back to what they're taught in their home. sooner or later, one way or the other. And I think we are all products of this, even as adults. We are products of what our parents did with us in the home. and what
Well,
they
I'm
taught
sure
us.
the kids are saying, Mom, can you pick me up at the library instead of school? So that gives them a couple hours to go mess around, walk down to the library and stop and get in a little trouble along the way,
Right,
and expect the librarians to be the daycare.
well, maybe it has to come to the point, if these students don't behave themselves, then they're not allowed to come into the library. They're expelled from the library for a month, or whatever. But again, that's going to mean more staff is gonna have to keep track of these people. So we're looking at money again, aren't we?
And we're also looking at, incidents that happened at the library we saw happen in a town close to here. There was a stabbing,
Right, Winchester.
Winchester. So you're gonna need metal detectors there.
So everywhere we go, we're going to
Well,
need,
they never got in the library with that one. He was stabbed outside on the way to the library.
No, this was just last week.
in
Yeah.
Winchester, Jim.
Yeah.
This was the last week one.
She was in there studying, this man came in and knifed her.
Yeah.
And there was somebody else that tried to stop him, got involved. He also got knifed, but his injuries were not fatal.
Right. But there was also plenty of instances previously of mental instability with this gentleman before this happened. So unfortunately, our control system for mental illnesses is very lacking these days, very lacking. It needs to be brought back up to speed. And the pants have to be scared off these people that there are consequences for your actions.
Fear is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Fear is a wonderful thing, no matter what it may be for. There's all different kinds of fears that really is for your own benefit. Look at what we eat. Do you have fear of what you eat? I do.
I should.
That's right. Because there's a negative consequence to this. So therefore, in your behavior, if you behave in a certain way, there's a negative consequence. Do you want to endure that negative consequence?
Do you want to feel sick from something you've eaten, right?
Just not sick, but it could also lead to death.
Mm.
You know, if you're eating hamburgers 24 hours a day, you'll have coronary disease inside of 5 to 10 years. And then what?
Did you have something else you want to say about the library there?
Well, the only thing about the library that it certainly is no longer an institution of academic study. Even my experience there, before they had this new library and the old library, I used to do work there, and many times I would have to tell people, not just children, but adults, would you please put your voice down and be quiet? And in some instances, there were library employees who were bringing people around, showing them the library, and they were talking, seeing people there studying. They saw me studying, and they just ignored that and just were talking at full tilt. And I said, "Excuse me," and their attitude toward me was not positive at all. So the whole concept of library as being a place of academic study is no longer.
It's
It
a
is
place
not-
of internet connection.
That's right.
That's
It is a
unfortunately 80%
right.
of the people are going for the free
Right.
internet connection and
Exactly.
a place to
Right.
to chill out
Right.
after school.
It's a community center.
It's a community center.
So now,
Yeah.
we've got this other problem. Now we've added another dimension. I think it's going to get worse. And now our library is just not for citizens of Shrewsbury, but a lot of people from the outside come and use our library.
And we have the best one around.
Right, and those people laugh at me and they thank me, because they're kidding me. They're making fun of me that you built a library.
Well, the
and
time has come to say goodnight. I thank you both for joining me,
Thank you,
and
John.
we'll see you next month.